Hello. Whenever I'm asked to be interviewed on the BBC, even though it's supposed to be about the mating habits of ring-tailed lemurs, the first question will be, what about cancel culture? Because mentioning cancel culture is the best way of geeing people up, and that guarantees they won't switch channels. Same with the word woke. Most people have little idea what it really means, but despite that, they tend to have strong feelings about it. Very strong. Now, Frank Luntz, my resident pollster, will tell us what people do think it means. Frank?
John, we've been polling on woke for the last 6 months. I've got the data right here on my laptop. Labor supporters are more than twice as likely to identify themselves as being woke than conservatives. But 1/3 of the British population doesn't even know what it is. The data that matters most to me, however, is that 1 out of 4 Brits have stopped talking to someone because they reject their point of view, and 1 out of 5 have had someone do it to them. And if you want to know who those people are, 18 to 29-year-olds, half of our youngest population, have cut someone off simply because they disagree.
Thanks, Frankie. So, tonight, I want my dinosaurs to clarify a few things. So I've asked my friend Matthew Syed to give us a brief history of the word woke. Matthew, can you help us?
I think the first documented use is in a song by a blues singer called Lead Belly, who was singing about the Scottsboro Boys, who are a group of young black Americans who had gone into the south of America and been accused of rape. Incorrectly accused of rape, but were sentenced to death after an all-white jury found them guilty within a few seconds. And what Lead Belly is saying to black Americans is be awake. Be aware of racial prejudice if you go into the South, the Jim Crow South.
Yes.
And it was really a consciousness-raising term.
And when was that?
So this song, Scottsboro Boys, was in 1930... Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
In 1938. But what fascinates me, John, this term becomes very prevalent in the African-American community. You know, we need to be aware of racial injustice. And moreover, we need to be conscious of what we need to do to overturn it. But then, through a process of social and linguistic osmosis, it tiptoes ever more widely into the mainstream. And then you come up to today, and it's now a term of abuse, that people who are woke are too sensitive to injustices, in much the same way that political correctness was kind of a positive term at the beginning,
yes,
but now is a term of abuse. And linguists call this process pejoration, how a positive term slowly becomes a pejorative.
But it then got widened from racial discrimination to any form of discrimination at all, perceived or real.
Perceived or real, and any form of injustice.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps around 2017, 2018, we became wrapped up with this ideological move in American universities called critical race theory, where injustice almost doesn't have to be observed, but is there in the power structure. Institutional racism, institutional misogyny, various other kinds of institutionalized things, which are very difficult to measure empirically, but are said to be there because of the structure of the power relations. And that's when...
And they are there, and they're bad, but they're also perceived to be there when the justification for that perception can be tiny.
I have a bit of latitude to talk about these things because I'm mixed race. So I think if you're somebody from my background who has been on the receiving end of racism, it gives me latitude to kind of satirize what has become known as woke ideology. But you, white, heteronormative, from a colonializing nation.
Oh, I'm an imperialist
you
to
go
the
into
core,
Exactly, you go into this terrain with some severe baggage on you. I mean, it's interesting to me that when I look at the trajectory of your career, I've always seen you, in your early life, you took, as many great comedians do, you took aim at the power structures of religion and conservative ideology, what you characterise as closed systems of thought. But I think you're right to turn your attention to woke, because it has become a closed system. For me, the fundamental Achilles heel here is not to understand the global context. If you look to other parts of the world, ethnic discrimination is rife.
Right, everywhere.
Tribal conflict still characterises much of sub-Saharan Africa, much of the Middle East. So these are two groups that will be fighting with each other because of a different tribal identity. Sometimes this has a different ethnic identity, different linguistic identity. This has been a big problem for humanity since the agricultural revolution. You are 100% right to say liberal democracies have done this better than any other kind of government. It has had an approach that tries to treat these characteristics as arbitrary, and we should judge people on the content of their character, the talents they could bring. Is it perfect? Unquestionably not.
No, it's never going to be perfect.
Look at Lebanon, look at Somalia, look at these places where they haven't even got a coherent national identity because people still feel they're a member of a tribe rather than a nation state. I would love to see the debate just have a bit more nuance, a bit more historical and geographical understanding. That way, we're more likely to reach an interesting consensus about what we wish to do. What amazes me about the woke, anti-woke argument is it's never on substantive issues that we can do to actually make people's lives better. It's a distraction from what we need to do.
I think an awful lot of it is an unattractive side of humanity, which is to sort of want to be right, you know, even if they don't know why they want to be right. They want to be right. So you get, as I said, you get, you know, I've suffered this appalling oppression, microaggression, because they've always in America mispronounced my name.
Well,
you know,
Cleese.
Cleese. Whoever ate cheddar cheese, you know? So but I've survived, you know? And I'm going to set up an institute where I can teach people to spot microaggressions, which otherwise they might never have noticed at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Helen, I'm so happy to have you on this show. Isn't it cool? And the reason I'm happy is that I can't get the woke people to come on and discuss it with me. We've asked over a dozen of them, and they basically refuse. So the way I want you to help me, Helen, is that since they won't come on to answer the questions I'd like to ask, if I ask you those questions, will you give me the answers that they would normally give? Because you've studied that and you know how they think, and why won't they discuss this with me?
So you are coming here from a marketplace of ideas approach, the concept of debate, of bringing ideas together, comparing them, seeing which stand up best to critique, qualifying them, having them critique each other, is understood largely as a Western white masculinist tradition.
So this is liberalism, would you say?
Yes. Liberalism is very explicitly critiqued in what I would call critical social justice, and most people call wokeness. Liberalism is the big enemy. This idea that if we get people together, we are then rational agents who can evaluate ideas, compare them, and replace bad ideas with better ones, or as John Stuart Mill would say, exchange error for truth. This is, to the social justice activists, a Western philosophy. It does not allow for the lived experience and the different knowledges of marginalised people.
As I am a straight, white male and an imperialist...
Apparently, yes.
Apparently. Is that why they won't speak to me?
It certainly is a big strike against you, yes. But even more than that, have you taken effort to educate yourself, do the work, uncover your own biases, dismantle your whiteness, detoxify your masculinity, and decolonise your concepts of knowledge? Because if you have not done any of this, then you are not woke. You are not awake to the systems of power and privilege. You are still asleep, and so there is no point in speaking to you.
OK, but the whole thing sounds to me really quite authoritarian, slightly like the medieval church. I mean, they're very much saying what you can, not just what you can say, but also really what you can think.
It certainly is an authoritarian a system. But if you truly believe that these systems of oppressive power absolutely exist and permeate everything, that they are perpetuated through language, they are doing harm to marginalised people every minute of every day, then the idea to control what people can say and what they can think, and also to subject them to unconscious bias training to retrain their minds, does seem like an effective way to achieve social justice. Liberals, like me and like you, presumably, will argue with this and say, no, we need to argue about these bad ideas. We need to defeat these bad ideas by showing why they are bad. This doesn't work to the critical social justice people.
Yeah, well, one of the women who would not come on the show said that the very fact that we're having a discussion is the problem.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, this is particularly strong in the post-colonial, decolonial movement.
Right.
You want to have a debate. I don't know if you've seen the slogans, my existence is not up for debate. That comes from the trans rights movement. If you want to debate...
So to disagree with them means that you're trying to disappear them completely.
That's what it comes down to, yes. I mean, we saw Linda Sassa also said criticism of Islam, for example, is a denial of the right to exist. Now, obviously, if Islam didn't exist, Linda still would. But the idea is that by criticising any identity or any belief system, you are not allowing people to exist as they are, but they just speak of existing and even of genocide.
I think an awful lot of people have no idea that that's what some aspects of woke are about, because they just say, well, being woke is kind to people. And, you know, that's great.
This idea that wokeness is about being nice, it is about just being aware of racism, sexism and homophobia and being opposed to it.
Well, that's all totally sensible.
Yes, but of course, wokeness is not the only framework from which this can be done. Liberals also have been opposing racism for a very long time. Marxists oppose it on the grounds that it divides the working class. Conservatives generally oppose this as well. Religious believers that think that we are all the children of God. This is what I have argued. Any kind of policy needs to allow for people to come from different frameworks in opposing racism, sexism, homophobia or other bigotries. But the critical social justice movement does not accept that other frameworks do this.
We mentioned cancel culture earlier. Do you want to add anything to that?
Cancel culture is something that I've been dealing with for quite a while, because a lot of time people think of cancel culture as something that affects celebrities who are being hounded and perhaps not allowed to speak in one particular arena, and they say, but you're still speaking, you haven't been cancelled at all. But if you look at who is actually being cancelled, the organisation that I have worked with looks at blue and white collar workers who are being asked to undergo various kinds of training, are objecting to this training, and are being fired, suffering disciplinary action. Trade unions are very, very wary of even addressing the issue. So cancel culture affects those who do not have a voice.
That's very interesting. So it's the smaller people who suffer the worst because they lose their jobs. Yeah, whereas people like you and me and J.K. Rowling and so forth can speak out because they can't actually get us fired.
This is why I would argue, from an admittedly biased left-wing point of view, that this cannot realistically be seen as a left-wing movement when it arranges things so that only the independently wealthy can actually speak.
That's funny.
And when it supports corporations in inflicting these kind of policies on workers, and then it stands with corporations against workers.
Yes.
This is very much against the whole ethos of the left. In the US, it's an $8 billion a year industry.
What is?
These kinds of trainings for employees.
Really? I'm fascinated by the way that corporations have... They're just frightened of an economic boycott, right?
And I am not sure how much a boycott would actually work. I mean, if we look at J.K. Rowling, her books are not failing to sell, are they? Even though there is such strong opinion, such a small percentage of people actually adhere to these critical social justice ideas that I don't think a boycott can really work.
Well, I'm hoping it doesn't, because I'm thinking of the adaptation I'm doing of Life of Brian.
Are you going to be problematic again?
I love that word. Nobody sort of signed up for it, and we are learning every day about inclusion and diversity and anti-racism and all that. And it's kind of arrived without anyone quite knowing where it came from. Right. It reminds me a bit of that thing in Holy Grail when Arthur says, I'm the king. And they say, well, we didn't vote for you. We didn't vote for this, did we? People?
No, it did not come as a result of a democratic process. It blitzkrieg society in the last 10 years. And so the words that you mentioned are one of the reasons that it's spread throughout the society. Inclusion, equity, diversity, anti-racism. People thought they were signing up for something different. They're getting something that they did not sign up for. They've been hoodwinked. They've been bamboozled by these words.
You say woke and it means kind, and you finish up with authoritarianism.
Correct. It's similar in that the words have two meanings. The meanings that people sign up for, and then the secondary meaning. So for example, inclusion. When normal people who are not steeped in this, they hear the word inclusion, they think, oh, well, inclusion, that sounds like a great thing. We want to include people in wheelchairs. We want to include people of all skin colors. We want to include people of all heights, of different ethnicities. Everybody agrees to that. Every sane person will sign up for that. But what inclusion actually means, so think about it like this. If we want to have an inclusive conversation, let's say we wanted to bring folks into our conversation, we wanted to include them. Well, to make sure that they felt included, they have to feel welcome. So to make sure that they feel welcome, we have to make sure that they don't feel offended.
Oh.
An inclusive space means a space where you restrict speech, a conversation in which speech is restricted. But people think they're getting a conversation in which all people can sit at the table and have a conversation, a discourse as equals. That's just not what it means. So for example, when you see the word equity, most people confuse, and it's a very simple confusion.
What it means to me, it means fairness.
Yeah, that's the exact opposite of what it means. So equity used to be a finance term. You know, you had so much equity in your home, and that's how most people understood the term until very, very recently. So equity and equality are not the same things. In fact, they're exactly the opposite.
They're the opposite?
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Okay, so equality means treating citizen one and citizen two equally. They get treated equally. That's what equality means. Equity means the redistribution of shares, redistributing something in society to have an equal outcome. For example, if you have so many members of a minority community in a society, you would want either a proportional representation, right? So let's say that you have 13% of your population is African American. You would either want a proportional representation, which is a kind of equity, but what you would really want is to look at the historical characteristics of the people. So if someone's ancestors, for example, were enslaved, you would want those individuals to be disproportionately represented in
Disproportionate. Not
higher,
13%,
higher.
but higher.
Correct.
So
That's
it's a kind of reparation?
It's a kind of reparation, but it's an equitable system. So you could think about it like this. Ibram X. Kendi, the multiple, massively best-selling author, succinctly captures equity as the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to the injustices, the clear and obvious injustices, and people were treated horrifically on the basis of skin color. Nobody's denying that. No. The only remedy to that is present discrimination and future discrimination. But that itself is not fair.
No.
Right. That's equity. And so that's another word. So that's how people have been bamboozled. They've been hoodwinked by inclusion. They've been hoodwinked by equity. They've been hoodwinked by diversity, by anti-racism. They've been hoodwinked by all these terms.
Diversity? Give me an example from diversity.
For example, in this conversation, we want diversity. So ideally what you would want is you would want a conversation in which all voices could be heard, in which people who have different interests, different class interests, different whatever interests would come, and they'd be able to freely participate in an exchange of ideas.
Incidentally, I wrote a little book on creativity, and I made that point, that the most creative groups are the ones that are most diverse.
Yeah, and my guess is, I haven't read your book, I apologize, but my guess is that what you mean by that is also intellectual diversity.
Well, that's right, yes. You want diversity of ideas.
Correct.
You don't want a lot of culture clash, which is why the guy in charge of the meeting is so important. But if you get diversity of ideas, then you get the most creative groups.
Right, so you just beat me to it.
Go on.
So diversity means intellectual homogeneity. It means that people forward, they have the same ideas and they forward the same ideas. And the ideas that people forward are basically one kind of a narrative based in the ideology. So diversity doesn't mean people of different skin colors. If anything, it means people whose ancestors were marginalized who have the same opinion. That's why, for example, black conservatives, if you put black conservatives on a panel, that's not diversity. You have to have the same opinion. Diversity, inclusion, equity, these words are simply not what people think. And again,
And anti-racism?
Anti-racism is another one. The idea is that racism is ever present in a system. So you can have a system in which there are no conspicuous racists, actual racists, but the system itself is racist. It's not if racism occurs. Racism is the default, but it's how it occurs. And you just spoke with Helen, who has a lovely example of this, in that a store owner of a small store is standing around, and at the same time, two customers come through the door, a black customer and a white customer. Well, who does the store owner help first? If she helps the white customer, she only helped him first because he's white. But if she helps the black customer, she did that because he's afraid that the customer's going to shoplift. So so the default condition is that the system itself, that racism is always operative, and you need to be trained to uncover it.
So it's like, oh, Charlie, you got a fur ball. Oh, poor old Charlie. Maybe he's having problems digesting some of the woke ideas.
Charlie's had enough wokeism.
Yeah. Gillian Phillip.
John Cleese, hello.
Nice to have you here. Thank you so much for coming, darling.
Thank you for having me.
Now, listen, you used to be a pretty successful children's author, and now you're not.
No, I'm not, no. I'd worked for a company called Working Partners, which is a book packager. And I'd worked for them since about 2011. Wrote quite a number of books for them in an animal fantasy series. So all went swimmingly. Then about in 2017, I started tweeting about the gender ideology issue. And then J.K. Rowling had that horrible campaign of abuse against her. You maybe read it at the time. It was shocking, the amount of hate she got for stating something that everybody believed till 5 minutes ago, which is that you can't change your sex. You know, dress how you like, as she said. You know, sleep with whoever will have you, however you want to. You know, but you can't. You know, don't bully people out of their jobs for saying that you can't change your biological sex. And she got so much hate for this, and I kind of felt I want to say something. You know, I kind of was aware that it was a really difficult, very touchy issue. So I added the hashtag I stand with J.K. Rowling to my Twitter handle. I know. So that was kind of blood in the water, and everything was kind of quiet for a couple of weeks. And then the sharks found me. You know, death threats, threats of sexual violence, that sort of thing. So I kind of ignored the first few comments, blocked. But it kept coming, and it was kind of like a snowball rolling downhill. It got worse for 24 hours. So it started morning of the 26th. By morning of the 27th, my publisher was on the phone.
Which year is this?
This is 2020.
2020?
Just not long after lockdown, say, about then. 27th, I got to sleep about 5 in the morning. Was called by my agent about 9. And the book packagers were on the phone, working partners were on the phone. We'll have to talk to HarperCollins, see if it's, you know, if you can still work for us. And 2 p.m., which was like 9 New York time, HarperCollins said, right, she's out, sort of thing. So, yeah, sorry, HarperCollins, say you're out and you're fired. So that was it. And that was the end of my career as a children's author. I don't blame anyone else at all for not speaking up about this, however they feel, because they know they're going to lose their jobs, but the kind of big ups at the corporations and the companies, if they would stand up to it and say, no, we're not going to base our company's policy and hiring on like the opinions of some anonymous trolls on Twitter, you know. But
well, the extraordinary thing is, there's several things here I'm fascinated by. Was why don't they, if you put something out on Twitter, why don't they identify? Hello.
Hello.
Oh, you're very disgusting, aren't you?
Oh, don't listen to her. Oh, you're lovely.
Where are you going? Oh, you're lovely. But if you put something out on Twitter, why don't they make people admit their identity? Why don't they say who's the author of this tweet? Because it's the anonymity that allows these nobodies to have a feeling of power. Yeah,
that is true. But then again, anonymity also protects people like friends of mine and writers who agree with me, but and they can have anonymous accounts and say it. And I don't blame them, as I said, they cannot tweet their opinions under their own name because their careers would be over too.
What do you do for money now?
I'd learned how to drive HGVs. I became a truck driver. Complete change of career.
What an extraordinary thing.
See, my trucker's tan.
How did that happen? I suddenly thought they look very nice, those HGVs.
Well, I didn't want to be in an indoor job. I realised I wanted to be out of doors because, as I say, it was the first year of lockdown, and I was lucky in lockdown in that I have a garden, and I'd spent a lot of my time outdoors, and it really helped. It really helped with my mental health after the cancellation happened. Yes. Just being outdoors and working really hard.
The authors, the Society of Authors, right, who represent authors, were they any good? Did they help?
It would be so much better for authors if the Society of Authors was willing to protect their freedom of speech. But I actually tweeted the Society of Authors about this, and they denied that freedom of speech was one of their priorities or even interests.
Wait a minute. The Society of Authors said...
That's not one of our things that we do. Some authors I know who are extremely brave, actually, tried to bring a freedom of speech motion to their AGM last year. They were called bigots and fascists on social media just for bringing a free speech motion before the AGM. And the Society of Authors ended up voting against free speech by 593 to 161.
Well, thank you for depressing me.
Yes.
Yes, well, I'll just go away and kill myself if you don't mind. Greg, I'm so grateful that you came. Greg Lukianoff has co-written the best book on this subject that I've read. You co-wrote it with Jonathan Haidt, wonderful author. It's called The Codling of the American Mind, and it's the most interesting thing I've read on all this stuff. But what I'm fascinated by is that it all started with you having a severe depression.
Yes.
So tell the tale.
Well, in 2007, I got so depressed I had to be hospitalized as a danger to myself. And in the process of recovering, the next year, I studied cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy is something that teaches you to talk back to your own exaggerated thoughts. When you
have the voices in your head, you argue with them.
Exactly. When you're catastrophizing, you call it out.
So catastrophizing means what?
That you're just thinking everything's going to be a catastrophe.
It
sounds very much like it sounds. When people are anxious and depressed, they have all of these cognitive distortions, at volume 11 going on in their head. And that just getting in the habit of talking back to them can relieve many of the symptoms of anxiety and depression.
So when you discovered that, what happened then?
Well, it changed my life. But I started seeing all over the place ways in which we were teaching young people the habits of anxious and depressed people. It was as if both in K through 12, in grade school, and in higher education, it was like the adults were saying, by the way, do catastrophize.
Go on.
Do engage in emotional reasoning. Do engage in binary thinking, which I know you think a lot about as well.
So you linked up with John?
Linked up with John Haidt. I told him what I thought was, because I'm a constitutional lawyer. My major focus.
Are you?
Yeah, I know.
I thought I liked you.
And I was defending freedom of speech on college campuses and academic freedom. And I noticed around 2013 that students were really clamping down both on freedom of speech, but they were also rationalizing it in this kind of medicalized way that was all catastrophizing, all binary thinking, all of these cognitive distortions. So we wrote an article together in 2015 saying the things that are threatening free speech on campus are also the kind of mental habits that will make young people anxious and depressed. Essentially, it's teaching people that essentially they should avoid challenges, they should avoid things that cause them any pain, but of course, things that cause you pain are also what cause you growth.
Yeah.
And so the emphasis on having your children not experience either physical or emotional pain or challenges is actually a profoundly unhealthy way to teach kids to think about the world and to let them be kids and grow up. It's tempting as a parent, because I have a 5 and a 7-year-old. I understand it. You want to protect your kids from emotional difficulty, but if you don't prepare them for a world that's difficult, and you don't prepare them for challenges, you're not preparing them to be adults. And even worse, you're creating a situation where of course they're going to be anxious and depressed because they're afraid of the world. They're afraid of adulthood.
Having all these insights with you, how do they affect the people who are advocating woke ideas?
I think that to a degree, this terrible advice is inherent to a lot of what we might call woke ideology, that essentially challenge is bad, that you should always follow your emotions, and most importantly, life is a battle between good people and evil people. A lot of the ideology that we're seeing, particularly on campuses, is this very simple narrative of there is pure good and pure evil, and you want to be on the side of pure good, always at war with the other person.
So that if you agree with a lot of the transgender agenda, but disagree with some of it, then you are a very bad person.
Then you are absolutely evil.
You're absolutely wrong.
Yeah. And this is part of the way that, unfortunately, in the places where we should be learning to argue like adults, we're teaching this very childish way of arguing. It creates the situation where you can just dismiss any person, any book, any thinker, any institution you disagree with, because since you can find everything as evil, anytime you don't want to listen to somebody, you just declare them evil, and
you don't have to bother with them.
You don't have to challenge your thinking at all.
Now, I want to ask you a little bit more about cancel culture, because every time I get on television, the second question is something to do with cancel culture. And all my friends are saying, why are you always talking about cancel culture? And the answer is, we're obsessed with it.
Yeah.
Tell me what you're thinking about it.
So I have a book coming out called Canceling of the American Mind.
Canceling?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's making the point that not only is cancel culture real, but it's so bad we're going to be studying it in 100 years. One thing that we've collected is the number of professors who have been punished or fired. And in the United States, you have to go back to the 1950s, to McCarthyism, to see numbers that are anywhere near as close to the number of professors.
Worse than McCarthyism?
In terms of numbers, absolutely. The estimates about 100 to 150 professors were fired from 1947 to 1957. And right now, we're approaching 200 professors getting fired. And
well, how does it happen? The students?
It used to be the administrators were the ones getting professors in trouble. And then it increasingly became the students and the fellow professors who were reporting them. So McCarthyism, it was generally people outside of higher education who were reporting professors.
See.
But now it's coming from within. And it's devastating for the production of knowledge. Because if people think that, if people aren't stupid, if they look at an expert and they come up with an opinion, and they say to themselves, wait a second, if you can be canceled for having the wrong opinion, why should I trust you to be objective about this anyway?
Is it anything to do with the fact that the fees at universities now are so high that the students are also sort of kind of customers as well as students?
That is part of the problem.
And they don't want to lose their customers, right?
It's related to the fees both because it creates a customer is always right situation, but also because those fees, at least in the States, increasingly pay for armies and armies, ever-growing numbers of bureaucrats and administrators who enforce really rigid ideological norms. They police freedom of speech, and it creates an environment that is very chilled.
Because the only real aim they have in life is not to get fired.
Careerism definitely plays a part, but there's also people who think that the key to saving the world is less and less freedom of speech.
Yes.
You would think we would have learned a bit from Galileo.
Well, I feel better informed, but also completely confused. So I've asked Helen and Peter to have a final chat on the subject of what do we do? Helen.
Okay, if we are going to address the problem of wokeism, as we've discussed, the main problem with it is authoritarianism. In a liberal society, we don't want to ban any of these ideas, but we also don't want to have them institutionalised. We don't want them imposed upon other people. So I have argued that we expand the concept of secularism, as we would say now, just as we wouldn't have someone have to affirm the Apostles' Creed in order to get a job, we shouldn't have them having to write a diversity, equity and inclusion statement which mirrors critical social justice. That should be something which is just off the table, as it would be with religion.
Peter.
I agree. I have three.
You don't have to.
No, I do, but I have a couple of nitpicks. But I have three things that I think may help people trying to navigate this and figure it out. I think the first order of business is what we spoke about, is they have to figure out what people mean by words. So if they're getting emails all the time from their daughter or son's schools talking about equity-based learning, they need to know what that means. Or the words we talked about.
Yeah.
This is an anti-racist curricula. So they need to have a basic rudimentary understanding of the meaning of words. This is not an academic thing. This is so that they can participate and understand what people are talking about. The second thing is they need to show up. They need to physically show up to meetings. Often in school board meetings or any kind of municipality, county meetings, the people who show up are the woke people, and they're the most vocal people. And so I know it's a hard work. I know people would rather stay at home in their pajamas, but they have to show up. The third thing, the simplest thing anybody can ever do. Don't give money to your alma mater. Your alma mater, the college from which you graduated, is simply not the same place today. And so you're giving money to support an ideology. We know where the ideology comes from. It's the university system. We know that they're teaching students things that are untethered to reality. Stop giving money to your alma mater. I don't think that our institutions are largely salvageable at this point. I think that, but if someone would like to salvage them, media institutions, academic institutions, et cetera, that's fine. I think that what we should be focusing on is building new things.
I think in practice that would take a very long time. If we look at the length of time it's taken to develop universities in this country, that was, I think, that from the 12th century. I don't think we're going to quickly produce something as good in principle as the current university system, where people can come together, where there are resources of all kinds. But we don't want to have a revolution, burn everything down. I don't want to. I think things are more redeemable than perhaps you do.
I hope you're right. My concern is that we have people who have jobs for life with tenure. My concern is that the reason the ideology spread is because they've taught students who have then gone into the workforce, gone into the administration, et cetera. If somebody wants to spend their time like that, that's fine. That's not how I choose to spend my time. I'm going to build new things. It is odd when you think about it that there is an ideology which has become a dominant value that nobody is allowed to question. We didn't vote it in, right? I mean, when you think about it, it's like, really, no one's allowed to question this? You can't even ask? Just asking the question, does it make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Not, it doesn't make sense to me, but does it make sense to you that we have all of these things that literally nobody believed 10 years ago? Men can get pregnant. Like, just a suite of propositions that nobody believed. And now you have to believe them, and if you ask why, you're not merely mistaken, you're a bad person. That
I still think, Peter, I still think that rather than confront these people, because most of us don't really enjoy confrontation. Some do, but they have a big advantage because most of us don't. And if you want to avoid confrontation, then I think the way to put our stuff across is to ask questions. Because if you ask a question and they say, well, you're not allowed to ask the question, then you apologize and leave. But, you know, if you ask questions, it's less confrontational, but you're also querying what they're telling you.
I don't know if you've heard just asking questions, JAQ. Now, you will be accused of off.
Of what?
Off. If you ask questions, I'm just asking questions, this is seen as a cynical move by a lot of activists now, and you will just get dismissed for which is not a phrase I really want to say 3 times.
Well, as they say on the BBC, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'm now going to make a pompous little speech because it's my show. So there. You see, I believe in liberal democracy. Now, I know a lot of people say that liberalism has failed, and I say no. Liberalism hasn't failed. Human nature has failed. There is no plan, no constitution, no set of rules that we human beings can't up. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Now, the essence of a liberal democracy is that people with different points of view discuss things, and then we hope in an ideal world some consensus emerges that can be acted on. But the woke say, no, we're not prepared to discuss our ideas because we're right. And if we start discussing them, people might suspect there is another point of view. I don't think that's a very constructive attitude. It works. I mean, at least it worked for Pol Pot. It's called authoritarianism. Now, the woke aren't throwing people into prisons, but they are having them thrown out of their jobs. It's the same authoritarian impulse. Oh, sorry for getting serious. Music!